The film begins with a scene in 1864, where Tsushima family intend to execute a young man named Kenshin. After carrying out a long interrogation and torturing, one of the samurai approaches him to intimidate. At that moment, he used the opportunity to bite the samurai's ears and started to put up a fight. He then took a sword using his mouth and used the sword to slaughter all the samurai in the house. He has very fast movements and can slaughter the samurai members in the room one by one. Not long after, a samurai commander named Hajime Saito and a samurai police force came and witnessed all of Tsushima's family members who had been killed tragically. They believe that this massacre is related to the status of the Tsushima family, which is a loyal supporter of the shogun group. That night, Kenshin again killed several samurai supporting the shogun's party. In a matter of seconds, he could easily overthrow the samurai one by one, leaving only one young samurai named Kiyosato who begged to live. He didn't give up, because he still had someone he loved and wanted to protect. But Kenshin showed no mercy and attacked him several times. Then he tried to get up for the last time and scratched a wound on Kenshin's face. The next day, Kenshin saw Kiyosato's fiancée crying, but he did not see the young woman's face. Then he returned to the Kohagiya Inn, an inn where the rebels were staying, and went to meet their leader, Katsura Kogoro, to report on the massacre of the Tsushima family the night before. Upon hearing this, Katsura asked Kenshin always to be careful and alert to the presence of the Shinsengumi police. The scene shifts to 1 year earlier, when Kenshin and the youths were gathered by the Choshu group to become its members. At that time, the Choshu group had recruited the best samurai candidates to become part of their army. Kenshin, who had just joined that day, was challenged by a Chosu member to fight in a one-on-one duel. Initially, Kenshin refused to fight because he did not want to fight against his own allies. But then the Chosu group leader, Shinsaku, asked him to show his abilities. After Shinsaku gave Kenshin a sword, he could easily strip the samurai naked and humiliate himself in front of everyone. Shinsaku seemed amazed by Kenshin's abilities and fast movements that Kenshin had. Katsura felt interested in his abilities. Since then, Kenshin has become one of the most reliable members. Katsura often assigns him to do assassinations. However, he realized that Kenshin still had a pure heart, even though he had killed many people. Back to the present, Kenshin is visiting the tavern to entertain himself by drinking sake. That night, he remembered Kiyosato, the samurai he had killed the other day, as if the young man had left a deeper impression than his other victims. Not long after, a beautiful young girl came to the shop and sat at the same table as Kenshin. Two slightly drunk men felt attracted by the girl's beauty and started to tease her in front of him. Annoyed by their presence, he pushed them away and warned them to leave the tavern. But instead of leaving the place, the two men instead waited for Kenshin outside the tavern and intended to kill him. Kenshin, who noticed the man's presence, warned them to go for their lives, but they ignored the warning. A masked samurai suddenly attacks them until they are killed and attacks him directly. Kenshin managed to avoid the attack and counterattacked until the mysterious samurai was killed. The murder incident was accidentally witnessed by a beautiful young girl Kenshin had previously helped, and the girl fainted with a kimono covered in blood. Kenshin was forced to take the girl to the Kohagiya Inn so that the girl could get treatment and get enough rest. The next morning, when Kenshin checked his room, he found that the girl had woken up and had helped with some household chores at the inn. Then she introduced herself as Tomoe Yukishiro and intended to work at the inn. At first, he objected to her presence and asked her to return home. She said that she had no family or home to return to. Before leaving him, Tomoe had asked Kenshin whether he could kill her if she drew her sword to him. Hearing that, Kenshin still couldn't answer. Katsura had received news about the attack that was experienced by Kenshin around the tavern and suspected that there was a traitor in their group. Kenshin returned to carry out his duties to massacre all members of the shogun's supporters who were holding a meeting somewhere. Meanwhile, Tomoe secretly writes her feelings into a diary every night. At midnight, when Kenshin was washing himself to clean the blood on his hands, Tomoe slowly approached him and gave him a small towel. In the following days, Tomoe began to actively pay more attention to Kenshin. As a result, the people at the inn begin to think of them as husband and wife because of their closeness. But Katsura, feeling a little suspicious, began investigating Tomoe to find out if she was a spy for the enemy. But the suspicions disappeared because they did not find any evidence about her. That day, a sword craftsman named Arai Shaku gave one of his best swords for Kenshin. The next day, Tomoe takes Kenshin to a festival downtown and sees a children's play on a stage. On that occasion, she asked him whether he would continue sacrificing many people's lives to reach his goal. Kenshin replied that he would do anything to achieve a new, more peaceful era in the country. On the other hand, the Shinsengumi police managed to arrest a member of the Choshu rebel group and obtained information that the group planned to burn down the palace and take the emperor to Choshu territory. Knowing this, Shinsengumi police commander ordered his troops to capture all members of the Choshu rebel group. At the same time, Kenshin was suddenly surprised by the arrival of a Chosu member named Izuka, who informed him about the Shinsengumi troops who were about to attack the base where the rebels were gathering. Hearing this, Kenshin ran to headquarters to help the Chosu rebel group against the Shinsengumi troops. Shinsengumi troops had already arrived at the headquarters and attacked all the rebel members. The big battle was fierce, causing many victims to fall. Even the rebel members who tried to escape from that place were caught by a samurai named Soji Okita, captain of the Shinsengumi. When Soji was about to kill the member of Chosu's group, Kenshin, who had just arrived at the scene, stopped him. The duel between them had begun. It was fierce and very tense. But in the end, Kenshin managed to defeat Soji. Saito arrives with his troops and prepares to attack Kenshin. But when the fight was about to start, another member of Chosu's group came and asked Kenshin to leave that place. That night, a large-scale battle forces occurred, resulting in the burning of most of the city. Since the incident in Ikadaya, more and more Shinsengumi troops have roamed the city center and forced the rebel groups to flee and hide. This incident made most of the rebel members even more vigilant, including Kenshin and the rest of the Chosu group. Even that night, when Tomoe was about to cover Kenshin, who accidentally fell asleep, Kenshin, shocked, suddenly woke up and almost killed her. When he realized that the person next to him was Tomoe, he apologized to her. He answered Tomoe's question some time ago that he would never kill her, even if she drew a sword in front of him. Not long after, Saito and the Shinsengumi troops came to the inn and intended to capture the remaining rebels. Then Kenshin took Tomoe away from that place and ran away from the pursuit of the Shinsengumi troops. The next morning, Kenshin met Katsura hiding in a shop. He asked Kenshin to hide in a secluded area until the situation became more secure. Then he asked Tomoe to live with Kenshin and pretend to be Kenshin's wife while hiding somewhere else. After he left, Kenshin sincerely invited Tomoe to live with him. After walking quite far from the urban area, Kenshin invited Tomoe to live together in a small house outside Kyoto. Every day, Kenshin works as a farmer while Tomoe helps him complete other jobs. Their relationship slowly gets closer, like lovers living in peace. One day, Kenshin revealed that while living with Tomoe, he felt happiness like he had never felt before. A few days later, Izuka approached the two of them and gave them some money so they could continue living. After giving supplies to Kenshin, Izuka went somewhere, and at that time, a Chosu member named Katagai was secretly following him from behind. It turns out that all this time, Izuka has betrayed the Chosu group and conspired with the Yamanobu group, who are loyal supporters of the Shogun party. He then gave information to Yamanobu's leader, Tatsumi. Katagai, who knew that Izuka was a traitor, intended to report this to Katsura, but one of the Yamanobu members caught him first and killed him. After Izuka finds out about Katagai secretly following him to the base, he becomes concerned that the other Chosu members know about their group. Soon after, Tatsumi ordered his youngest member, Enishi, to go to Kenshin's place and meet Tomoe. The next morning, Enishi arrived at Kenshin's place and met Tomoe, his older sister. He tells her he wants to help Tomoe get revenge on Kenshin. At the same time, Kenshin, who had just returned from the market, saw Enishi, who had just left his house, followed by Tomoe, who told him that Enishi was her younger brother. That afternoon, Tomoe finally told Kenshin everything about herself and her family. Her mother had died when Enishi was born. As for Tomoe herself, she was engaged to her childhood friend who had become a samurai, but he died a few days before they were married. Seeing the sadness on Tomoe's face, Kenshin hugged and tried to calm her. He promises that when the new era comes, he will not kill anyone anymore and will try to make her happy for the rest of his life. The next morning, Tomoe wrote down her feelings on the last page of her diary and took a sword before she finally went to meet her brother at Yaminobu headquarters. It turns out that Yaminobu's group has been using her to get close to Kenshin and discover his weaknesses so they can kill him easily. When Tomoe arrives at Yaminobu's headquarters to share information about Kenshin, she is surprised that she only finds Tatsumi alone. It turns out that he has sent his troops to several points to trap Kenshin and kill him without her knowing. Tatsumi suspects that Tomoe has been giving false information about Kenshin because she has fallen in love with him. On the other hand, Kenshin, who had just woken up from his sleep, found that Tomoe had left the house and intended to look for her in the forest. Not long after that, Izuka came up to him and told him that Tomoe was actually a spy sent by the enemy to spy on him. Izuka even convinced Kenshin to read Tomoe's diary to prove his claims about her being a spy were true. After reading her diary, Kenshin finally knew that the young samurai who once gave his face a scar was Tomoe's fiancée, Kiyosato. Knowing this, he felt very disappointed because the girl he loved so much only approached him to take revenge for her fiancé's death. At the same time, Tomoe finally realizes that she is only being used by Yamanobu's group to kill Kenshin. As a result, Tomoe, who felt angry, attacked Tatsumi with a small sword. But he can easily block her attacks and knock her down with one strike. In the middle of Kenshin's trip to a temple, he was suddenly attacked by a member of Yamanobu's group named Nakajo, with several arrows and traps they had prepared. When Nakajo thought Kenshin had been seriously injured, he dared to directly approach Kenshin to kill him. But Kenshin quickly used the opportunity to slash his hand and make Nakajo lose a lot of blood. Yamanobu members named Suita and Muryoi attacked Kenshin with sword slashes from all directions, so he had difficulty focusing his attacks. But even though he fought two people at once, he again managed to kill them and force them to blow themselves up. As a result of the explosion, Kenshin had impaired vision and was injured so badly that he had to use his sword sheath as a cane to walk. After Tatsumi discovers his army has been defeated, he fights Kenshin. Then, he took out his sword and prepared to kill Kenshin. But Kenshin still continued to fight back and tried to attack Tatsumi. At the same time, Tomoe, previously tortured by Tatsumi, tries to get up and help Kenshin. In the end, when Tatsumi is about to make the final attack on Kenshin, he deliberately lets the attack hit his shoulder to find out where Tatsumi is. It was at that moment that Kenshin launched a counterattack toward Tatsumi and accidentally slashed Tomoe, who was trying to help him. As a result, Tatsumi died by Kenshin's sword along with Tomoe. When Kenshin's vision recovered, he found Tomoe lying helplessly in front of him with a severe sword wound. Before she breathed her last, Tomoe looked at him and apologized to him while giving him a scratch on his face as a remembrance. Then Kenshin finally had to accept that the girl he loved had to die in his arms. A few days, Katsura came to his house to tell them that the real spy in their group was Izuka, and at that time he had sent a swordsman to hunt down Izuka. Hearing this, Kenshin said that he would continue to fight until their goals were achieved and a new era emerged in their land. He said that he would never use his sword again once they achieved that goal. After Katsura left, Kenshin returned to reading Tomoe's diary and found out about her true feelings. He finally discovered that even though Tomoe initially wanted to kill him, but her feelings changed over time, and she started to love him. After reading the entire diary, Kenshin left and set fire to the house and her lifeless body. The film begins with the battle between the rebels, including Battousai and the Shinsengumi troops in the Kyoto area in 1868. The fight was fierce and resulted in many casualties from both sides, but in the end, the rebel forces won the battle and were able to fly the imperial flag as a symbol of the beginning of the peace era. The Shinsengumi troops commander named Hajime Saito wanted to duel with one of the rebel member named Himura Kenshin. He also known as Battousai, a samurai who can kill enemies very quickly by using only a few attacks without getting injured. They have long encountered each other in battles, but not once have they ever fought. Saito challenged Kenshin, but he refused to keep his promise to his wife, not to kill anyone again after the era of peace begins. Soon after, he He plunged the sword that had claimed the lives of hundreds of people into the ground as a sign that he no longer wanted to become a Battousai. Moments later, one of the samurai named Udo rose from behind. He walked unsteadily and accidentally touched Kenshin's sword. 10 years later, Japan's situation reached a revolution and began to develop. It was ruled by an emperor named Admiral Arimoto Yamagata, but there was a drug lord named Takeda Kanryu. He made his fortune by selling opium-type illicit drugs to the people. He no longer had any rivals in the business after having all the people who knew how to make opium killed, except for a beautiful woman named Megumi. The following day, Saito and the Shinsengumi police officers found the body of the man who concocted the drug and started an investigation into the murder case. When the officers suspected that the man was killed by a Battousai, Saito felt certain that his killer was a fake Battousai because he had seen how the real Battousai carried out the massacre. Meanwhile, the real Kenshin alias Battousai is surprised when he finds a police poster. Kenshin suspects that a samurai is pretending to be a Battousai and using Battousai's reputation to harm others. Suddenly, a girl named Kaoru pointed a wooden sword at him. She feels deep hatred toward the person on the poster because they killed her father and destroyed their dojo. She attacked him because she thought Kenshin was a Battousai, being chased by the police. Kenshin says he is just a wanderer, and the sword he carries is a sword with an inverted sharp edge, so that the sword cannot be used to kill other people. After hearing his explanation, the girl apologized. Saito comes to Takeda's headquarters to interrogate Takeda. He suspects that Takeda is the one who has sent a fake Battousai to kill a man in a case being investigated by the current Shinsengumi police. However, due to the lack of sufficient evidence to prove Takeda's guilt, Saito and the police could not arrest him. That night, Takeda gets news from his men that his opium concoctor, Megumi, has escaped from their base. Takeda ordered his men, named Udo, to find Megumi's whereabouts. It turns out that Udo is a fake Battousai who found the sword of Kenshin. Meanwhile, Megumi decides to hide in the Shisengumi police station to seek cover. Unfortunately, not long after, Udo managed to track down Megumi in that place and began brutally massacring all members of the Shinsengumi police. Megumi managed to escape from the place by breaking the window of the police station at the time of the riot. When Udo was about to walk home to Takeda's headquarters, he killed a police officer and threw him from a bridge. Kaoru, who happened to be there, realized that Udo, a Battousai who had been hunted by the police. Kaoru has a personal grudge against a Battousai because several years ago, the real Battousai killed her father very cruelly. However, Udo can easily knock her down with one strike until Kaoru falls to the ground. Kenshin, who heard the commotion, ran over to them and saved Kaoru from Udo's attack. Seeing his movement speed and attack accuracy, Udo knew that the person in front of him was the legendary Battousai figure he had been looking for. When Udo was about to attack Kenshin, the Shinsengumi police force had already arrived, so Kenshin used the opportunity to run away with Kaoru. After that, Kaoru took Kenshin to her family's hermitage and thanked him for his help. She then told him that formerly the hermitage was a school run by her father, but after Battousai killed her father, Kaoru turned the place into a small hermitage and has only a male student named Yahiko. The next day, a group of thugs came to Kaoru's mansion and forced her to sell the mansion to them. Kaoru clearly refused to sell it because her father inherited the place, so she asked the thugs to leave. But instead of listening, the thugs destroyed things in that place and created chaos. Kenshin with no weapons. He can easily defeat all the thugs, one by one. After most of the thugs had fallen, he turned to Kaoru and said that he would demonstrate the fighting style of a Battousai. Everyone in that place was shocked by Kenshin's statement that he was the most feared legendary Battousai in the past. Kaoru was no exception, who at that time could only be pensive when she learned that Kenshin was the Battousai she had been looking for all this time to take revenge for her father's death. Not long after, several police officers from Shinsengumi came to the place and arrested everyone who created chaos, including Kenshin. Arriving at the police station, Kenshin was detained for a while before being brought by Saito before Admiral Yamagata. After receiving information from Sato, Admiral Yamagata finally learns that Kenshin is a rebellious samurai who has slaughtered many people to reach a new era and bring peace to Japan. Soon after, Admiral Yamagata intends to ask Kenshin to help kill everyone involved in the manufacture of opium drugs. He explained that opium trafficking could destroy their people and their country, so he wanted to eradicate the entire drug dealer to the root. Sadly, Kenshin refuses to carry out the task because he vows not to kill anyone again after the era of peace has been achieved. Hearing that, Saito took Kenshin's sword and asked how he protected others with a reverse blade sword. Kenshin replied that he could protect the people around him without killing his enemies. Shortly after, Saito challenges Kenshin to a one-on-one duel to prove his words. After the short fight, Admiral Yamagata stopped them both and asked Saito to release Kenshin. He had accepted Kenshin's decision that he didn't want to kill anyone else. On the other hand, Megumi, who had been on the run for several days to escape Takeda's men, finally managed to escape and accidentally met Yahiko. While crying, she asked him to save her and hid her at his place. At the same time, Kenshin, who had just been released from detention by the Shinsengumi police, found that Kaoru was waiting for him in front of the police headquarters. Even though Kaoru already knows that Kenshin is Battousai, who once killed her father, she realizes that Kenshin already regrets his actions and has also shown his intention to change to be a better person. Arriving at the dojo, Kaoru told Yahiko that Kenshin would be living with them from that day. Then, Megumi, who had been helped by Yahiko, introduced herself to Kenshin and Kaoru. At night, Kaoru invites Megumi and Kenshin to have dinner at a tavern while talking. Even though Kenshin is not good at expressing his feelings, he feels happy to feel the warmth and togetherness he hasn't had in a long time. Not long after, Takeda came with his men to meet Kenshin after they learned he was a former Battousai. Then he asked Kenshin to work as his bodyguard while giving some money. However, Kenshin refused the offer because he did not want to be involved with a mafia member like him. Shortly after Kenshin turns down Takeda's offer, a young man named Sagara Sanosuke comes carrying a large sword to offer himself as Takeda's bodyguard. Even challenged Kenshin to a one-on-one duel to prove his ability to Takeda. Hearing that, Kenshin and Sanosuke walked out of the diner so they wouldn't cause chaos. On the city bridge, Sanosuke started to issue his first attack by swinging his long sword at him. Surprisingly, Kenshin did not attempt to counterattack and simply dodged the attack. After a while, Kenshin stepped on Sanosuke's sword and asked Sanosuke if a formidable fighter like him really wanted to work for someone like Takeda. The question left Sanosuke silent and astray before he finally stopped his fight with Kenshin and decided not to work for Takeda. In the evening, Udo, obsessed with being a Battousai, again massacred the thugs who had attacked Kaoru's dojo the other day. The next day, Saito and the police officers who had found the thugs' bodies began investigating the case. At that time, Kenshin, who happened to be in that place, saw a young woman crying over her family's death in the massacre. The incident made him remember his past, when his wife, Tomoe, had experienced something similar to that woman. A dozen years ago, Kenshin had killed a group of samurai who were members of the shogun's party supporters. And one of the samurai he killed at that time was his wife's future fiancé. The samurai was the first person to scratch Kenshin's face. One day, residents around Kaoru's dojo came to her place and asked for help to heal their sick family members. It is still unknown what caused it, but some of the residents in the district began to fall ill at the same time. Megumi, a medical expert, gave directions to Kenshin and Sanosuke to carry out detoxification treatment for every patient there. The residents were finally healed and gradually recovered from the disease. Kenshin was curious. He tried to ask Megumi about what really happened to the townspeople. She said that Takeda and his men had poisoned the water sources of residents that have been contaminated with dangerous drugs. Megumi then says she is an opium maker and Takeda's mistress, while Takeda runs his illegal business. Many people had developed an opium addiction so badly that they all died horribly because they couldn't get help. After hearing Megumi's story, Kenshin recalled the task given to him by Admiral Yamagata and kept thinking about the suffering of the Japanese people caused by Takeda's greed. After considering many things, Kenshin decided to go to Takeda's headquarters and help the police to catch Takeda. Sanosuke found out that Kenshin was going to attack Takeda, so he offered to help Kenshin. Just before they left, Kaoru suddenly ran to call Kenshin and told him that Megumi had left the dojo. In the letter left by Megumi, she intends to come to Takeda's headquarters alone and kill him directly. On the other hand, Megumi arrived at Takeda's headquarters and was welcomed by Takeda because he thought she wanted to work for him again. But when he approached her, Megumi grabbed a knife and attacked him. Unfortunately, Takeda's men managed to stop her, and she has to get some hard slaps from Takeda. Kenshin and Sanosuke have arrived at their base and intend to save Megumi. Takeda mobilized his entire crew to fight against them, so a fierce battle finally occurred. Kenshin and Sanosuke fought very epically, where they could take down several opponents at once with just a few attacks. Upon arrival at Takeda's headquarters, Kenshin and Sanosuke faced two tough fighters, Inoue Banujin and Gain. Their battle was fierce and tense until they finally defeated their two enemies. Unfortunately, when they arrived in front of Takeda's office, they were greeted with continuous bullets from the machine gun that had been prepared by Takeda. Luckily, Yahiko managed to contact the Shinsengumi police so that Saito and Kenshin could help confront Takeda. With the attack tactics and strategies directed by Saito, they finally managed to capture Takeda and his men at that place. While Saito was securing Takeda, Kenshin and Sanosuke rushed to the room where Megumi was being held to free her. When her mouth was untied, Megumi told Kenshin that Udo had gone to Kaoru's place and kidnapped Kaoru. It turns out that Udo's goal in taking Kaoru hostage is to provoke Kenshin's anger so that he can force Kenshin to become a Battousai like before. Kenshin rushed to the location where Kaoru was being held according to the instructions left by Udo. When Kenshin arrived, Udo attacked him using the sword that had been used by him to kill many people. During the fight, Udo tries to provoke Kenshin so that he returns to being a true Battousai as before. Udo even uses a forbidden move to paralyze Kaoru's lungs, forcing Kenshin to fight seriously. Kenshin had no choice but to start fighting against Udo with all his might. After a fierce fight, Udo began to be cornered and seriously injured. But when Kenshin turned his side of the sword and prepared to cut Udo's body, Kaoru shouted and asked him not to kill Udo. She was afraid that Kenshin would turn into Battousai like before, so she begged him not to execute Udo. Hearing that, Kenshin finally decided to cancel his intention to kill Udo and only paralyzed Udo's right arm. But unexpectedly, Udo prefers to end his own life with his sword. Afterward, Kenshin carried Kaoru, who had fallen unconscious, and left the place. Several days later, Kaoru finally regained consciousness. From then on, they would live a more peaceful life at the dojo with Megumi, Sanosuke, and Yahiko. The film begins where a Japanese police commander named Saito Hajime and his troops are carrying out an arrest operation against government rebel groups. During the operation, that night, several members of the police force were suddenly slaughtered by the samurai named Sojiro Seta from the rebel group. When Saito tries to investigate the attack further, he meets Makoto Shishio, who leads a rebel group. Makoto support the Shogun party therefore, he offered Saito to join his group, considering that the police commander also supported the Shogun's party in the past. However, Saito refused the invitation. Hearing his refusal, Makoto ordered his men to attack Saito before they finally left the place. The scene switches to Kaoru's Kamiya dojo, which now has many students. Many of these students wanted to learn sword techniques from Kenshin. Unfortunately, he refused to teach them and asked them to focus more on the sword techniques taught by Kaoru. That day, several police officers came to see him and asked him to meet the interior minister named Okubo. Soon after, Kenshin and Sanosuke went to the ministry office to meet Okubo. When they arrived at Okubo's office, he told Kenshin that he wanted to ask Kenshin to help defeat the rebel group led by Makoto Shishio. Okubo explains that in the past, Makoto Shishio was a Battousai who worked for the Shogun government and had a cruel and unforgiving nature. Just like Kenshin, Makoto has extraordinary sword arts abilities and can defeat many opponents at once. But he is known as a brutal Battousai who has the heart to kill anyone around him. Therefore, after the war ended, the government decided to kill him and ruthlessly burn him alive. Unexpectedly, when Makoto was burned, snow suddenly fell and extinguished the fire in his body. As a result, he managed to survive even though his body suffered severe burns. And from that moment on, he was determined to take revenge against the government. Therefore, Okubo asks Kenshin's help to stop Makoto before they all create great chaos and destroy a new era of peace. Okubo knew that Kenshin had sworn not to kill anyone, so he gave Kenshin time to consider the offer. After Kenshin and Sanosuke returned to Kamiya's dojo, Kenshin told about the task given by Okubo to Kaoru. Hearing this, Kaoru doesn't want Kenshin to accept the assignment because she is afraid that Kenshin will turn into a Battousai again. 1 week later, Okubo was traveling to the ministry office using his horse-drawn carriage. He was suddenly attacked and killed by Sojiro Seita as part of Makoto's plan to overthrow the current government. Okubo's death reached the ministry office. While bringing Kenshin in front of dozens of police officers brutally killed by Makoto's troops, they explained that Makoto was getting out of control. Saito, who happened to be there, advised Kenshin to go to Kyoto and look for Makoto's troops. After he returned to the dojo, Kenshin, who had decided to accept Okubo's assignment, told Kaoru that he was going to Kyoto. Hearing his decision, Kaoru could only remain silent. However, Kenshin realized that this task was too dangerous and that he could be killed in this mission. So he said goodbye to Kaoru and thanked her for everything she had done for him. When Kaoru arrives at Kamiya's dojo, she tells everyone that Kenshin has decided to go to Kyoto. Sanosuke was very upset because Kenshin went alone and did not let him help with the mission. Sanosuke walked out of the dojo to vent his anger. At that time, he met a samurai named Aoshi Shinomori, who asked about Kenshin's whereabouts because he holds a strong grudge against him. Sanosuke chased the man away and said that there was no Battousai in that place. However, he attacked Sanosuke to tell him about Kenshin's whereabouts. Sanosuke almost died from the samurai's attack, but suddenly Megumi stopped the samurai so that Sanosuke could survive. That night when Kenshin was fetching drinking water in the river, a girl named Misao suddenly appeared and stole his sword. Fortunately, he managed to catch her in a village and reclaim his sword from her hand. She still wanted to take his sword. A boy suddenly approached them and asked for help to save his older brother, who was seriously injured. The next day, Kenshin and Misao went to the village where the boy lived. When the boy found that his parents had been brutally murdered and hanged from a tree, he could only cry while calling for his parents. Not long after, Makoto's men returned to the village and intended to kill Kenshin, who was alone then. As a result, he had no choice but to fight against all of Makoto's troops in the forge to protect the surviving villagers. After a long fight, Kenshin defeated all of Makoto's troop members without injury. Shortly after the fight ended, Sojiro approached Kenshin and asked him to follow him to meet Makoto. Upon Kenshin's arrival at Makoto's place, Kenshin asks Makoto to fight, but he refuses after he sees Kenshin's sword, whose sharp side is reversed. Then, Makoto orders Sojiro to represent him to fight against Kenshin, so he can find out how great Kenshin's current abilities are. A brief battle between Kenshin and Sojiro begins where both look superior and have very fast movements. But unexpectedly, after a very intense and epic fight, Sojiro managed to win the fight and managed to break Kenshin's sword. From that fight, Kenshin realized that Makoto's strength and abilities were still superior to his own. After the fight, Kenshin returns to the village to meet Misao and the boy he had previously helped. But when Kenshin arrived there, he found that the villagers who were still alive were beating up Makoto's men, whom he had previously defeated. They even provoked the boy who previously asked Kenshin for help to kill Makoto's troops as revenge for the death of his parents. When the boy is about to kill a member of Makoto's army, Kenshin stops him and advises him not to become a killer. Meanwhile, at Makoto's headquarters in Kyoto, Makoto's man named Hoji has finished preparing the equipment and weapons they will use in the big battle later. Makoto also orders Sojiro to prepare a trained samurai troop called the Troop of 10 Swords. On the other hand, Sanosuke, who is still not fully recovered from his wounds from his fight with a samurai, intends to go after Kenshin to Kyoto. Megumi gives him some medicines that he and Kenshin can use later, but instead, he gave the drug prescription to Kaoru and said that the person who had to heal Kenshin's wound was Kaoru. After a long journey, Kenshin finally arrived in Kyoto and accidentally met Misao again. Then she invited him to stay at an inn managed by her relative, Okina. Okina was a former member of the samurai in the reconnaissance squad during the Shogun era, known as the Onin-Wabanshu. Okina then tells Kenshin about the former chief of the Onin-Wabanshu squad named Aoshi, who grudge against him. In the past, after the Shogun government was overthrown and replaced with a new imperial government, All members of the reconnaissance squad were executed by the government. Aoshi thinks that what happened to his troops was caused by Kenshin, because Kenshin has created a new era in the country. Kenshin informed that his main purpose in coming to Kyoto was to stop Makoto's movement. Then he asks Okina for help to find the whereabouts of a man named Arai Shaku, who once gave him a reverse-edged sword. At night at Makoto's headquarters, one of Makoto's men named Cho, who has been spying on Kenshin, secretly reports that Kenshin is currently planning to look for a new sword from Arai Shaku. The next day, Kenshin received information about Arai's whereabouts, but it turned out that Arai had died several years ago. While visiting his grave, Kenshin recalled the memories of the past, when Arai gave him an inverted sword so that he could protect others without having to kill the enemies. After that, Kenshin went to Arai Shaku's house to meet Arai's son, Arai Seiku, and asked for help. So he made a new sword for Kenshin, but unfortunately, Seiku has not yet to forge swords for a long time because he is worried that the swords he makes will be used to commit crimes. After hearing Seiku's explanation, Kenshin respected his decision and left the place. Shortly after Kenshin left, Cho suddenly appeared and threatened Seiku to hand over the last sword forged by Arai Shaku. But because he refused, Chao took his baby and took him away from the place. Because of that, Seiku and his wife ran after Kenshin and asked him to help save their baby, who had been held hostage by Chao. Kenshin rushed to a temple where Cho was holding Seiku's child hostage and asked him to hand over the baby. But Cho didn't listen to his request and preferred to attack him, so the fight between them could no longer be avoided. On the other hand, Kaoru and Yahiko, who had arrived in Kyoto, received news about a fight between two samurai in a temple. They rushed to the shrine because they were sure that one of the samurai was Kenshin. Back to the fight between Kenshin and Cho, Kenshin was forced to fight using the scabbard because his sword had been broken in the previous fight. Seiko, who realizes that Kenshin does not have a sword, decides to take the last sword left by his father so that Kenshin can win the fight. After picking up the sword in the warehouse, Seiko threw the sword at Kenshin in the middle of the fight. After knowing that Kenshin already has a new sword, Cho tries to provoke him so that he can return to being a Battousai by killing Seiko's son. Fortunately, before Cho could injure Seiko's child, Kenshin stopped him and slashed his neck. Kaoru, who saw the incident, panicked and tried to call Kenshin's name so he would not return to being a murderer. But after Yahiko took a closer look, it turned out that Kenshin's new sword was a sword with a sharp, upside-down edge, so he still hadn't killed Cho. After the fight, Seiko could get his baby back while Chu was detained by the Japanese police. They want to ask him about Makoto's plan. Based on the information provided by Chao, Makoto plans to create a big mess by burning Kyoto the next night. Upon hearing that, Saito ordered Kenshin and the police squad to prepare themselves for the fight against Makoto's troops. That afternoon, the police began evacuating all residents and asked them to move to a safer location. While at the inn, Kaoru and Yahiko asked Kenshin for permission to help in the battle tonight. At first, Kenshin rejected because the battle would be very dangerous, but Kaoru continued to insist, so he had no choice but to allow them to join. In the evening, the battle between the Japanese government forces against Makoto's troops finally began. Soon after, Makoto's troops came with a giant fire torch to burn the houses and buildings belonging to the residents. When they arrived in front of the city, the police forces opened fire on them, and the big fight finally began. Meanwhile, Kenshin and Saito have prepared to defeat the enemy with their swordsmanship skills. On the other hand, Kaoru and Yahiko are trying to prevent Makoto's troops from burning down the residents' houses. At the same time, Sanosuke begins to fight against the enemies. Meanwhile, Aoshi was at the inn, who was looking for Kenshin's whereabouts to take revenge. Okina tried to remind Aoshi, so a fierce battle between them could not be avoided anymore. Misao, who was on the battlefield, received news that Aoshi, her old partner, had come to Okina's inn. Then she rushed to the inn to meet Aoshi, who she had not seen for a long time. But when she arrived at the place, Misao was shocked that Aoshi had beaten Okina so viciously. In the middle of the fight, Kenshin finally found Makoto on the battlefield, so he ran after Makoto. But apparently, it was just a trap made by Makoto to trick him. Because of that, Kenshin was forced to face dozens of Makoto's men who had surrounded him in that place alone. Fortunately, with a little help from Sanosuke, Kenshin managed to defeat the enemy, and the Japanese government forces won the big battle. After the fight ended, Kenshin felt something was wrong because they could easily win the fight. He remembered that Makoto had two main goals in the attack he was carrying out: overthrowing the government and destroying Kyoto. Not long after, Kenshin realized that Makoto had kidnapped Kaoru, so he rushed to chase Makoto. After going through a long journey, Kenshin finally arrived at a port where Makoto's battleship was docked. He jumped into the ship to defeat Makoto's men and save Kaoru. Makoto's goal in kidnapping Kaoru is to awaken the killer's soul from within Kenshin. Feeling that he had been tricked, Kenshin attacked him and the Ten Swords army alone. In the middle of the fight, Kenshin saw Makoto's men, who dropped Kaoru into the ocean, so he stopped the fight and plunged into the sea to save her. Sadly, Kenshin failed to find Kaoru anywhere and was dragged by the waves until he was stranded on a beach. Suddenly, a mysterious man approached and saved him. The scene begins to an island where a boy is trying to bury several people who have died in an attack. After the man asked the boy's name, it was finally revealed that he was Kenshin when he was very young and still uses his real name Shinta. After learning that Shinta has a strong potential to become a samurai, the man named Hiko Seijiro promised to train Shinta so that he could become a great swordsman in the future. He also changes Shinta's name to Kenshin. A moment later, Kenshin woke up and found himself in an old house which turned out to be the home of his master. Kenshin asked if Seijiro had found a girl who drifted with him, but he said he only found Kenshin alone. He said that Kenshin had been unconscious for 3 days. Kenshin then asked his master to help teach him a secret sword technique called Hiten Mitsurugi. Fortunately, Seijiro agrees to Kenshin's request, but before teaching the technique, he wants to test Kenshin's abilities first. Meanwhile, on a beach in Tokyo, the residents were surprised by the appearance of Makoto's large warship, so they ran towards the city to warn the other residents. After Makoto's large warship docked on a beach, he fired several cannons. As a result, the residents could only run in fear to save themselves. Misao managed to save Okina. She didn't expect that Aoshi, a former captain of the Oniwa Banshu squad, would have the heart to do cruel things to Okina, a former member of the Oniwa Banshu squad. She felt very angry with Aoshi and intended to take revenge on him. Kenshin was still practicing his sword against Seijiro. In that fight, he could easily beat Kenshin even though he only used a wooden stick as a weapon. He warns Kenshin not to misuse Hiten Mitsurugi's move because that move should be used to protect weak people, not for political gain. Meanwhile, Makoto's troops meet the Prime Minister, Hito Hirobumi, a government representative who wants to negotiate. Makoto promised not to attack Tokyo if Hito wanted to hand over Kenshin and execute him in front of them. Hearing these conditions, Hito had no choice but to sacrifice Kenshin to save Tokyo and the Japanese government. Soon after, Hito and the government began distributing poster leaflets in various places so everyone could report Kenshin's whereabouts to the police. From that day on, Kenshin was officially a fugitive from the government and would be executed in front of rebel forces. The news about Kenshin has reached the Oniwa Inn. Sanosuke and the others are very disappointed with the decision taken by the government. However, at the same time, they felt relieved after knowing that Kenshin was still alive. Not long after, they received news that Kaoru had been found and was currently receiving treatment at a hospital. Sanosuke and the others rushed to the hospital to check if she was okay. When they arrived at the hospital, they found that she still had a high fever and was unconscious. Kenshin was repeatedly knocked down by attacks from Seijiro. Kenshin did not give up and continued fighting against him. In that training, Kenshin was reminded of old memories when he kept trying to get back up even though his master had knocked him down repeatedly. Okina, finally awake, he ordered Misao to look for Kenshin's whereabouts after finding out that he was still alive. That night, Seijiro asked about the scratches on Kenshin's face. He told Seijiro that he got those scars when he was still a Battousai. Soon after, Seijiro asked if the person he would face was also a Battousai like him. Kenshin said that Makoto was much tougher than himself, and even Makoto's men had managed to beat him in a sword duel battle. After hearing those words, Seijuro started to move to help Kenshin learn the Hiten Mitsurugi technique. But before he teaches the technique, Seijuro asks him to reflect on his mistakes in every fight he has done so far. That night, Kenshin tried to think about what was wrong with him, but until morning came, he still couldn't figure it out. That morning, Seijuro gave him a sharp sword and asked him to fight a serious duel so that Seijuro could show him what wrong all this time was. The fierce battle between them finally begins. In this fight, Seijuro really intended to kill Kenshin. When Kenshin is getting cornered and almost killed, he finally finds out about the mistake that his master is referring to. He realized that he had never been afraid of death when fighting against enemies all this time. Seijuro explains that his remorse for his past mistakes has made Kenshin weak and unafraid of death. Seijuro tells him to have a strong will to survive and start thinking about his happiness to become stronger. Sanosuke found that Kaoru had left her room and gone to the beach alone to find Kenshin. Sanosuke and Yahiko ran to the beach to pick up Kaoru, who was still not fully recovered. Kaoru invited them to go to Tokyo and look for Kenshin. Meanwhile, Kenshin has now succeeded in mastering Hiten Mitsurugi's sword moves, thanks to the help of his master. When Kenshin was about to leave Seijuro's house, Misao suddenly told him that Kaoru was still alive. She also tells him that he has become a fugitive from the government. Before Kenshin left, Seijuro told him to always be careful and fight to be able to return from the battlefield alive. After that, Kenshin and Misao went to the Onowabanshu Inn to meet Okina before their departure to Tokyo. But when they arrived at the inn, they found that Okina had left the place and gone to the secret path that Kenshin would follow later. Okina deliberately came to that place to stop Aoshi, who was still obsessed with revenge on Kenshin. While still seriously injured, Okina tries to fight against Aoshi to awaken him and not to do revenge. Unfortunately, because Okina's body is still not fully recovered, he can easily beat Okina. Shortly after, Kenshin arrived at the location along with Misao, who rushed to save Okina. Aoshi met Kenshin, and their fight started. While continuing to remember Seijuro's message to fight with the fear of death, Kenshin tried to fight Aoshi, who was still consumed by anger. Soon after, Misao tried to help him defeat Aoshi, but Aoshi could easily throw her body, making her fall to the ground. This incident made Kenshin feel very angry, so he became even more serious to fight. After a fierce fight, Kenshin finally beat Aoshi without killing him. He realized that Aoshi was still obsessed with the title of a Battousai, so Kenshin was ready to accept his challenge if he wanted to fight for the second time. After the fight ended, Kenshin continued his journey to Kamiya's dojo. Megumi greeted him, who had been worried about his condition all this time. Seeing Kenshin looking messy, she gave him a red shirt that Kaoru had left for him. Soon after, the Tokyo police force surrounded Kamiya's dojo and arrested Kenshin. Even though there was a short fight, Kenshin finally surrendered himself to the police, so there would be no more victims. Meanwhile, at Makoto's headquarters, Hoji informs Makoto that the condition of the burns on his body is getting worse, and he can't fight too long. If Makoto is determined to fight for more than 15 minutes, his body will get hotter, and he can be burned to death. Back to Kenshin, who has been arrested by the police and brought in front of Prime Minister Hito. Soon after, Hito apologized to him because the Japanese government had to sacrifice him so that Makoto and his troops would not dominate the Japanese government. On that day, the police officers took Kenshin to the beach, where he would be executed in front of Makoto and his troops. The residents of Tokyo also gathered to witness the execution, including Kaoru and her other friends. They asked the authorities to stop the execution, but unfortunately the execution continued. Hoji announced all of Kenshin's mistakes in the past when he was still a Battousai by mentioning the names of the samurai he had killed. After Hoji finished reading all the names, the executioner prepared to behead Kenshin with a sword. But unexpectedly, the executioner untied Kenshin's hands. It turned out that the executioner was Saito, and the execution was just a tactic prepared by the police so that Kenshin could approach Makoto. In the end, the battle between the government troops and Makoto's troops finally began. Then Sanosuke joined the fight and helped the police. After that, Kenshin and Sanosuke go with the rest of the police force to Makoto's warship, while Saito and the others will try to defeat Makoto's troops, who are still left on a beach in Tokyo. Saito is still superior and can even defeat samurai from Makoto's 10 Swords army. Arriving at Makoto's warship, Kenshin and Sanosuke began fighting against Makoto's troops. On the other hand, Kenshin must return to fight against Sojiro, who previously defeated him and could break his sword. Fortunately, thanks to intensive training with his master, Kenshin managed to dominate the fight and defeat Sojiro until his sword broke. A tense battle between Kenshin and Makoto finally begins. At the beginning of the fight, Makoto seems superior to him, who could only make defensive moves without having a chance to launch a counterattack. Besides that, Makoto's sword can emit very hot bursts of fire, making it even more difficult for Kenshin to face him. Fortunately, Saito arrived at the warship, and with Sanosuke, they tried to defeat Makoto. Not long after, Aoshi also came to the ship and intended to kill Makoto because he wanted to be the only person who defeated Kenshin, the legendary Battousai. As a result, Makoto has to fight against 4 people at once, namely Kenshin, Saito, Sanosuke, and Aoshi. Unexpectedly, even though Makoto only fought alone, he managed to dominate the battle and toppled Saito, Sanosuke, and Aoshi. Soon after, Makoto's female assistant, Yumi, realizes that Makoto has exceeded the time limit for the fight, and his body is slowly heating up. So she begs Kenshin to stop the fight. But the unexpected happened again. Makoto suddenly used this opportunity to stab Kenshin. Because of that, he had to stab Yumi's body at the same time. Makoto then carried Yumi's dying body and put her on the other side so he could continue his fight. Kenshin, who saw this incident, became very angry and finally ended the fight with the Hiten Mitsurugi stance he had learned from his master. With one hit by Hiten Mitsurugi, he slashed Makoto's neck and sent Makoto flying so hard that he fell to the floor. Makoto, who was already dying, carried Yumi's body to the top of the stairs before he finally died due to excessive heat, which caused his body to burn out. With the death of Makoto and the destruction of his warship, the Japanese government forces finally defeated his troops and protected Tokyo. Upon the arrival of Kenshin and Sanosuke on a beach in Tokyo, Prime Minister Hito and Japanese officials greeted them and saluted the samurai. Hito declares that Kenshin's title as a Battousai has been officially removed, and his reputation has now been restored. The film closes with a scene where Kenshin and his friends live in Kamiya's dojo in peace and quiet. The film begins with a scene in train stations, where the Japanese police commander named Saito Hajime is carrying out an operation to arrest a Chinese mafia boss named Enishi Yukishiro. Enishi is known to have illegally traded various weapons to the Japanese state for the past few years. After assaulting several police officers, he asks if the legendary Japanese Battousai still has the scars on his face. But because Saito didn't give any answer, Enishi started attacking several police officers, creating a big mess in the train station, and then fighting against some officers inside the train. Fortunately, Saito's troops managed to surround him, so he had no choice but to surrender himself to the Japanese police. Surprisingly, when the Japanese authorities handed Enishi over to the Chinese authorities, the Chinese consulate released him to maintain peace between the countries. It turns out that Enishi is one of the most influential mafia bosses in China and has some political support in the government. On the other hand, Kenshin and Kaoru return to live their lives peacefully. In the evening, they have dinner at a food stall they usually visit with their friends. But shortly after they left the tavern with Sanosuke and Yahiko, Enishi and his men suddenly blew up the tavern until it burned. That night, a police officer invites Kenshin to investigate a suspected hill where Enishi's group prepared all the explosives. Unfortunately, they didn't find any evidence in that place, apart from a paper containing a message saying, "Human punishment." After seeing the message, Kenshin told the police chief that it was a message that a samurai or Battousai would use to justify their massacres. After returning to Kamiya's dojo, Megumi and Sanosuke had just finished treating the victims who were injured in the explosion that night. The next night, when Kenshin and Sanosuke were talking in front of Kamiya's dojo, a member of the dojo police headquarters suddenly appeared in front of them, covered in wounds. The man said that their dojo had been attacked by a group of unknown people. They rushed there to help save some of the other dojo members. On their way to the location of the attack, several police officers approached them and informed them that another attack had occurred at the police chief's house. Hearing this, Kenshin and Sanosuke decided to split up into 2 locations. Upon Kenshin's arrival at the police chief's house, he found that the person who carried out the brutal attack on the police chief's house was one of Enishi's men named Hiyoko. Hiyoko aggressively attacks Kenshin, using 2 machetes on both sides, while Kenshin is still ahead despite only using 1 sword weapon. In the middle of the fight, Kenshin could corner him and disarm his machete, but Hiyoko could still counterattack with multiple kunai. Kenshin managed to defeat Hiyoko and make him suffer very severe injuries. Unfortunately, Hiyoko blew himself up, causing the whole place to burn down. Seeing that Kenshin feels very guilty when he knows other people suffering from someone's revenge attempts against him. On the other hand, Sanosuke also had to swallow the bitter truth because Enishi's men had slaughtered all the dojo members, and there was no one he could save. The next day, Kenshin accidentally crosses paths with Enishi, who introduces himself as the younger brother of the girl who was killed by him 14 years ago. Enishi reveals that he didn't kill Kenshin directly to make him suffer by hurting the people around him. After knowing Enishi's goal, Kenshin becomes even more restless because he has to imagine the people he cares about getting hurt one by one. Meanwhile, a Chinese politician named Heizing came to Enishi to question the continuation of their deal. In the deal, Enishi had promised to hand over his organization to Heizing once his goal of revenge was achieved. After Heizing left, Enishi was reminded of an incident in the past where he tried to convince his older sister, Tomoe, to leave Kishin because he is a very dangerous person. Kenshin decides to tell Kaoru and the others that the recent attack was an attempt by Enishi to take revenge on him. Kenshin revealed that Enishi is the younger brother of a girl named Tomoe, Kenshin's late wife, who had died from a slash from Kenshin's sword. At that moment, Enishi witnessed Tomoe's death and thought Kenshin intended to kill her. After hearing that story, Sanosuke and the others couldn't help but fall silent, while Kaoru, who began to feel for Kenshin, could only grieve in silence after knowing he had loved another girl sincerely. At Enishi's headquarters, a samurai sword named Cho, who is now working on the side of the Japanese government, challenged Enishi to a one-on-one duel because he cannot accept the insult given by Enishi for his defeat in the fight against Kenshin. Meanwhile, at Kamiya's dojo, Misao and Aoshi meet Kaoru to give Tomoe's notebook. Misao confessed that she got the book from an acquaintance who knew Tomoe well, and the acquaintance asked her for help to hand the book over to Kenshin. In the evening, Enishi and his troops began terrorizing the entire Kyoto by spreading paper containing the words human judgment. Shortly after, they blew up several buildings using an explosive weapon, resembling a cannon fire. Kenshin tried to stop Kujiranami. The fight between them started. Fortunately, Kenshin managed to defeat him and destroy the weapon, even though Kujiranami's weapon was intentionally superior. Aoshi and Misao are also fighting against Enishi's men named Mongyoi. However, because the person targeted by Mongyoi was Kenshin, he chose to blow up the place and run away. Aoshi was seriously injured after he tried to protect the residents. At Kamiya's dojo, Enishi came carrying Cho's lifeless body because he had lost the fight against Enishi. Seeing Enishi's appearance in that place, Sanosuke tried to face him to protect Kaoru and the others. However, Enishi's fighting ability is far superior to Sanosuke's, so he can easily take down Sanosuke. Not long after, Kenshin, who had succeeded in defeating Enishi's men, ran to Kamiya's dojo. He found Sanosuke lying helpless with severe injuries from Enishi's attack. Sanosuke told him that Enishi had taken Kaoru away from that place at this time. Kenshin found clues about Kaoru's location in the paper that was stuck in Chu's mouth, who was dead. Kaoru, who had just woken up, found herself in a strange house. She ran out of the house and tried to escape. Not long after, Enishi approached Kaoru and intended to kill her because she had mentioned Tomoe's name. But for some reason, a part of him told him not to do that, so Enishi discouraged his intention to kill her. At night, Kenshin came to Enishi's headquarters alone. He was forced to fight against hundreds of Enishi's men using swords whose sharp edges were reversed. Fortunately, in the middle of the fight, Misao came to help Kenshin defeat Enishi's men. She comes because she intends to avenge the person who injured Aoshi in the previous attack. Saito and the Shinsengumi police force also came to the place with Sanosuke, who was still not fully recovered. Kenshin finds Kaoru's whereabouts and save her. Upon Kenshin's arrival at Enishi's base, Heishin and his troops surround him, and intended to kill him. They had even hired the services of a samurai named Sojiro Seta. Unexpectedly, Sojiro attacked Haishin's men and intended to help Kenshin defeat Enishi's troops. Sojiro deliberately did all that because he had woken up after Kenshin managed to defeat him in their last fight. When Kenshin arrived before Enishi, he said that he could understand why Enishi wanted revenge so badly. He asked Enishi not to involve the people around him. At that moment, a fierce and dangerous duel between them began. At first, Kenshin managed to dominate the fight and even break one of Enishi's swords. But after Enishi took his other swords, he became more aggressive and eager to kill Kenshin. In the middle of the fight, Enishi said to Kenshin that the sins of a killer can only be redeemed by the killer's death. The battle between them continued, and Kenshin managed to make several counterattacks. Enishi, controlled by anger and revenge, stabbed a knife into Kenshin's body. Surprisingly, Kenshin didn't try to dodge or put up any resistance at all. He tried to meet Enishi's eyes and apologized to Enishi. Kenshin suddenly appeared and intended to shoot them both, but Kaoru ran and stopped him. Then, when Kenshin was about to shoot Kaoru, Enishi unexpectedly protected her with his body and allowed himself to be shot by a bullet. Enishi was annoyed that Kenshin had interfered with his fight with Kenshin, so he pressed Kenshin's body and intended to kill him. It turns out that Enishi protected Kaoru because he saw his older sister's side in her, so he didn't want to let her get hurt. After that, Enishi couldn't help but cry while remembering his memories with his older sister Tomoe. A few days later, Enishi was finally arrested by the Japanese police and imprisoned for all his crimes. While in the prison cell, he received a package from Kaoru in the form of letters and notebooks that Tomoe had left behind. In the book, Tomoe says that she abandoned her intention of revenge and prefers to love Kenshin because he is the one who has given her new happiness. Enishi could only cry and regret his actions that had claimed many people's lives. After everything was over, Kenshin and Kaoru came to Tomoe's grave to pay their last respects and show their gratitude because Tomoe was a figure who had helped bring peace to this country.